Hi, I'm Marky Billson, and I'm going to tell you about the Pruitt dilemma that the Tennessee Volunteers currently face. The news came out yesterday that basically athletic director Phil Fulmer gave Jeremy Pruitt a vote of confidence and spoke about next season following the Vols 3-7 regular season campaign that saw them really only beat cupcakes. Winless Vandy, 2-8 South Carolina, and I'll admit that Missouri's record doesn't come to my head immediately, but they weren't real good either. Those are the only teams Tennessee beat, and it's becoming increasingly clear that Tennessee, well, there's a certain type of team that they can beat, such as their struggling SEC foes, but they'll also always lose to Georgia, Florida, and Alabama, and it's been going on that way for years. Now, maybe that's why there isn't an urgency to rid oneself of Jeremy Pruitt in Phil Fulmer's mind. But I think a more likely scenario is he doesn't want to admit that he's made a mistake. If you look at modern day athletic directors, there's only one other old coach that is currently an athletic director at a Power 5 program. That's Barry Alvarez up in Wisconsin. And frankly, it's just not the way that people are going with athletic directors. Yeah, once upon a time, old coach was always the athletic director, but not now. It's more of an administrative role. And also, I think that in the case of Fulmer, in his entire career, he's hired assistants. He's hired coordinators. He hasn't hired head coaches, obviously. And so, as a result, I don't know if he can hire a head football coach. And we'd give him a pass on Jeremy Pruitt, who is woefully inept, and I'm going to get to that here in just a second. But I think you have to also look at ETSU, East Tennessee State, which he had a major hand in developing that program when it revived after a 12-year hiatus back in 2015. And he was basically responsible, Phil Fulmer, after he turned down the job himself, of bringing in Carl Torbush as the head coach. I asked Phil Fulmer about this once. He said, well, we kept getting all kinds of hearing great things about Carl Torbush. And I can believe that. Torbush is a man of high character. But he also is a man of an 11-22 one-loss record at East Tennessee State. Just like Jeremy Pruitt is now 16-19 at Tennessee. Sound familiar? So right now, Fulmer is 0 for 2 in head coaching hires, but he doesn't want to admit that. And he realizes that if he ever has to fire Pruitt, it'll be ruled a failure. He also doesn't want to have to admit that he really missed the boat on where the Volunteers were going last year. They did beat up on cupcakes at the end of the last season. And although, Kentucky was a victory by 1 yard, and they had a wide receiver at quarterback. They beat Indiana, who had a good year this year, an up-and-coming program. They beat them because of a missed extra point. You're really overrating a lot of the Volunteers' accomplishments last season and not realizing that they're still losing to Georgia, to Alabama, and to Florida every year, and they're just not in that mix. They are instead in the mix of the Missouris, the South Carolinas, the Kentuckys, and maybe even the Vanderbilts. Who, 9 years, Vandy's beaten the Vols 5 times, so we'll see. Anyway, what came out on Saturday was a very interesting story from Trey Wallace, and it was that Tennessee was being investigated upon. And now you're hearing all kinds of rumors. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time about that because rumors are just that, rumors. They don't pass the Chicago School of Journalism. I will touch on a couple of them here in a second. But, that tells you how terrible it's been at Tennessee. Usually, when there's a report that the NCAA is investigating your program for alleged recruiting violations and impermissible benefits, the response from the fan base is that of panic. At Tennessee, there's a thought in the back of every Vols fan's mind of, oh, good, maybe Jeremy Pruitt can be fired for cause, and the Vols won't have to pay him that $12.8 million buyout. Good. That's how inept Jeremy Pruitt is. And I think a lot of it shows just the post-game press conference after the Vols' 34-13 loss to Texas A&M. They asked him about the NCAA visiting and working with the compliance and investigating the program. And you know what he said? I'm going to quote him right now. Quote, "I hadn't seen no article." Continues, "Anytime in college athletics, you're going to have typical compliance stuff, and that's all I know." Well, it really... Okay, first of all, you want to make East Tennessee out to be a land of a bunch of hillbillies, have one of the leading citizens utter sentences like, "I hadn't seen no article." You know, how this person is a communicator or gets a position of communication, which is what a head football coach at the University of Tennessee is, I don't know. It's as if Jeremy Pruitt has some sort of desire to coach in bare feet. That's all I can figure out. But if it's typical compliance stuff, then what about this? Your running back, Eric Gray, leading rusher, out for the game. Your backup quarterback, Brian Maurer, started several games last year, out for the game. Your defensive coordinator, Derek Ainsley, out for the game. Jeremy Pruitt had to call the defensive plays. Your running backs coach, Jay Graham, out for the game. And it wasn't because of the virus. It wasn't because of the pandemic. And when asked, Pruitt would only say Gray was unavailable. He did not comment on Maurer, Ainsley, or Graham. He was pressed. He would only say Gray was unavailable. Well, we figured that out already. Thanks for the big insight there, Coach. With that kind of response, it's hard to believe Jeremy Pruitt isn't trying to hide something, and poorly, I might add. Now, Tim Owens, who's a TV reporter down in Knoxville, tweeted this out right after that. It was, "The whole SEC knew they've been cheating. I have some crazy stories about how they would hand out cash. At the very least, some coaches will be fired with cause." He then goes on to tweet, "We've all been thinking it just because he didn't play today, but a source close to the program just told me Eric Gray was receiving improper benefits." Now, I got to tell you something. Trey Wallace works for a radio station that goes by fan-run radio. And admittedly, when you're going by fan-run radio, that speaks more of rooting than reporting. But then again, Wallace has he's energetic, and he's been on my old talk show. I'll give him that. He has not always been part of fan-run radio. Tim Owens, a TV reporter, I'm going to guess that he wouldn't just be tweeting something out with a position of responsibility like that if he didn't really have a strong source. That being said, tweets do not pass the Chicago School of Journalism. If your mother tells you she loves you, check it out. That's the Chicago School of Journalism. And you are having a reporter who scooped supposedly the Tennessean, Knoxville News Sentinel, all those media outlets, in a story of, hey, Jeremy Pruitt's on thin ice because the NCAA's coming to town. He's the one that reported that. Say what you will. All right? I mean, it could be that, Wallace has scooped everyone out. It's entirely possible. It's also, could there be a little bit of wishful thinking, and therefore Pruitt's, you always get compliance stuff. Could that be more the truth than, that the whole program is coming down? It does seem odd that one would have to cheat to go 3-7. But, Tennessee just has not been a very good football program in recent seasons. They have had 8 losing seasons in their last 13 campaigns, and they're even losing off the field. So much for champions of life, Butch Jones. Consider, the last game the Vols won against Vanderbilt. Who was the hero of that game? Who turned it around with this pick 6? Why, it was Bryce Thompson. Same Bryce Thompson that threatened to shoot up the school last year, remember? Yeah, he was suspended a month. Then the secondary got beat against BYU, lost the ball game, and maybe it wasn't so bad of a deal that Thompson had threatened to shoot up the school. He was back the next week on the team after the BYU game. I'm sure just coincidence. I'm sure, yeah. Kevon Bennett was cut from the team 3 games ago. Why? He's alleged to be a drug dealer when he was arrested with dozens of baggies and a Glock. And what's really disturbing there is that Kevon Bennett, of course, is the son of Cornelius Bennett, who was a wonderful linebacker for the Buffalo Bills in a big money era, perhaps not as much big money as today, but a big money era of the NFL. And you're thinking, really? You're dealing drugs and you're the son of an NFL player? Allegedly dealing drugs. But he was caught with the baggies, and he was caught with a lot of marijuana, and he was caught with a gun. And yeah, not a good thing. And got cut from the team. And I don't blame you one bit, but I also realize, the Vols were going to lose to Florida in A&M, and they were going to beat Vanderbilt whether they had Kevon Bennett or not. Anyway, Pruitt is this woefully inarticulate coach. We've been through that. I've talked before about how he can't even put out a legitimate depth chart. In this last depth chart, for instance, Brett Samaglia, who quit the team earlier, is still listed as the kicker. Now, that's just plain laziness, or you're lying to the public. And, that is, yes, an SID thing, but if the SID isn't getting the info from the coach, you got to blame the coach. And the fact of the matter is that historically, under Jeremy Pruitt, they list a lot of positions in the depth chart that don't have a starter. It's an either-or thing. And it gets to be where you don't think that the Volunteers players themselves know where they stand. This is how inept of a coach Jeremy Pruitt is. But I think you do have to point the figure at Phil Fulmer. Look, if Jeremy Pruitt is dirty, Phil Fulmer is dirty. Fulmer's the guy that hired him. Fulmer's been the guy that has said for the last several years that he's a good coach. He stood by him. He just gave him the vote of confidence and seemed to be indicate that he'd come back next year, which might not be the worst thing in the world because Fulmer just signed Jeremy Pruitt at the start of the year to a 2-year extension, so his contract doesn't run out until 2025. Now, really what that means is in college football on an SEC level, you got to have 4 years ahead of you on your contract to be able to recruit, to be able to assure potential recruits that, yes, I'll be the coach here. See, I've got 4 years left on my contract. Well, Pruitt now has 5. So I wouldn't think it would be extended now, but yeah. It's going to cost, like I said, almost $13 million to buy out his contract, plus then pay another coach, plus then pay the remainder of Butch Jones' contract. And I do understand Arkansas State is probably eating up a little bit of that money, but Butch Jones is still on the Tennessee payroll through February, assuming that Arkansas State isn't absorbing right now what Tennessee is paying him for the rest of his contract. This, and I know you say, well, boosters pay that, or boosters could be paying for a lot of other things, instead of the salaries of failed coaches, and they'd prefer to be paying for things like locker rooms and weight rooms and things of that nature. But let's take a look at Phil Fulmer. As I said, old coach just is not who athletic directors are. That's not where the pool is coming from in today's day and age. And you've got to ask yourself, when Jeremy Pruitt was hired, one of the candidates that Phil Fulmer was considering after John Currie couldn't get anyone to come into Tennessee after the rejection of Greg Schiano by the fan base, Les Miles. Les Miles won a national championship at LSU. You could do a lot worse than Les Miles. Les Miles is now at Kansas. Do you realize, and as bad as it's been at Tennessee, it's still not as bad as it is in Kansas, all right? Basketball school paying him less than $3 million a year. He took a pay cut with the pandemic to 1.5 did Les Miles this year, 1.5 million. Jeremy Pruitt made $3.85 million plus whatever endorsements and, sneaker contracts or whatever. That's more a basketball thing, but you get what I'm trying to say. Plus whatever else he's got on the side coming in. There's more money to be had at Tennessee. It is still an easier place to win than certainly Kansas. And yet Les Miles said thanks but no thanks to Phil Fulmer, but he didn't say that to Jeff Long. That's the athletic director at Kansas. Why would you do that? By the way, Long once was an assistant football coach, but if somebody is going to be real technical and find out that, what do you mean Barry Alvarez is the only coach? Yeah, Jeff Long used to be an assistant at North Carolina State. Head coaches, okay? Well-known head coaches. There are only two in D1 major college football as athletic directors, Fulmer and Barry Alvarez, okay? So let's just get that out of the way right now. But no, let's get back to the point. Why would Miles choose Kansas instead of Tennessee? It's real easy. It's real easy. He doesn't have to want to work with Phil Fulmer. Fulmer's going to be meddlesome. Fulmer never thought he should have been fired as the Tennessee head coach in the first place. Now, few people think that they should have been fired. So, I'll give you that. But it is a situation where Phil Fulmer's worked with the offensive line since coming back as the athletic director. And it's just, does Les Miles want old coach looking over his shoulder telling him what to do? A guy who's won a national title won't want that. A guy who's a coordinator wants to be a head coach. He'll put up with that. Jeremy Pruitt was hired to take orders. And that's what you got to remember, and that's why Phil Fulmer likes him. And that's also why if Phil Fulmer ever has to go back into the well to find another coach, he's going to have to admit failure first, but then it's probably going to be more of the same thing. Or else Fulmer's going to have to eat a lot of humble pie. And can you imagine if an established head coach comes in, the friction that could result? Frankly, you thought a lot of a lot of coaches turned down John Currie. You're going to see more coaches turn down a Phil Fulmer if he ever has to go shopping for another head football coach. You absolutely will. Right now, look, the fan base expects the program to be elite. It is not. The expectations are that to be Florida. And it's more of a South Carolina, Missouri job now. And that makes it real tough. It also doesn't pay, although it pays more than Kansas, it doesn't pay in the upper half of the SEC, despite the fact that Tennessee is one of the more profitable football programs in the country. So it's a tough place to win. The pressure is high. You've got an AD looking over your shoulder, and they don't pay. It's going to be real difficult to get a quality head coach. And so I wouldn't be surprised if this happens. Pruitt is going to stay on for next year. It's going to be a continued disaster. And maybe, just maybe, someone says, here, this is how you save face. You will make you the interim football coach, Phil Fulmer, for the remainder of the 2021 season. And Tennessee will go 3-9 or something like that. But one of the victories will be against Vanderbilt in your season finale. And then you'll announce that you're going to retire as athletic director and coach. And then we'll come out and, Randy Boyd, president of UT, will come out and say what a wonderful person you are, Phil Fulmer, and how loyal you've been to the university. And the media will parrot this, and they'll say what a wonderful job you did keeping Rick Barnes from going to UCLA. And you know what else? Under their breath, the administration will say, thank goodness we're gone to this. We can clean house. That's basically what's got to happen to get Tennessee on the right ship, on the right course. Their ship on the right course. The final thought here is that Hugh Freeze is being talked about as a potential coach for the Tennessee Volunteers. Hugh Freeze? Really? How did it end for him at Ole Miss? Yeah. How did it end for Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss? So here's a program in Tennessee being looked at by the NCAA, and the fan base wants to bring in Hugh Freeze. That, in a nutshell, is everything that's wrong with the Tennessee Volunteers football program. I'm Marky Billson. If you like this, I ask that you like the video. This actually is a redub. We had some production problems with the first time we tried to do this. But anyway, I want to thank you for listening. For real, honest commentary of the Tennessee Volunteers, it's right here. So I ask you to follow me on Medium, and I ask you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just hit the bell, and until next time, so long, everyone.